Hello everybody, with me Grandmaster Elisabeth Paehtz. You might not know us from this angle because normally we are on the German chess-based channel. To be precise, over 160 episodes of Ellis Schatztruhe, which means nothing else than Ellis' treasure chest. Elisabeth Paehtz is always finding new things to teach us, and one of her most viewed courses in the last year is the Neo-London, also of course for you, the English viewers. So what is actually the Neo-London? Elisabeth, please.
Well, the Neo-London is just nothing else than a new version of the London system, and what we do is basically like we change the move order. For example, like knight f3 is still like common in the London, or bishop f4 immediately. There are some slight differences, but let's not get too deep into detail. Knight f6, and here the Neo-London, the trick is we start with that move.
Okay, and I've seen it actually very recently. I don't know on which game, but I've seen it playing by some super grandmasters. That's the reason. So what is the trick?
The trick is the following, that usually the most players don't like the variation with bishop f4, c5, e3. For example, like knight c6, knight e2. And here is the very modern like knight h5 move, which is, well, it gained popularity not long ago. And also there's this queen b6 line, even though here the top engines actually give white some advantage. I'm currently working on that on another English DVD because this is the old London system.
All right.
But let's not get too deep into details. And the trick is basically that after c3, c5, you are able to capture on c5.
I see, okay.
Even so, this variation is absolutely okay for black. And I think the best line is with e6. You have to play bishop e3. The trick knight g4 looks tempting, but never works in this move order.
Oh, that's
right?
a nice game over.
Yes, it can happen actually quite quickly. And here, if I'm not mistaken, the best setup for black is either you start with bishop e7 or knight c6. It doesn't really matter. And here with g3 and then like knight c6, if I'm not mistaken, this move. And here I think knight g4 is one of the good options. Or castle. I'm not sure here. I have to be like honest with you. It's been a long time
It's been
ago.
some months actually.
Yes, but okay. This is of course also on this DVD, and it's analyzed in details.
If I may say, analyzed in details is almost underestimated. The word is it's over 9 hours. It's almost 10 hours, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It is absolutely in detail. It's like a mammoth episode, so it's really worth checking that out.
It could be actually that here after g3, knight c6, I give b4. But anyway, it doesn't matter because it's all on the DVD and it's analyzed. And I want just to show you like another like funny kind of way of how you can actually get a winning position immediately. It happened to me now in New York. One of my opponents played a5, and this looks like a move which is
an engine move.
Well, it's a very typical move because you prevent this whole thing with b4.
True.
Because this b4 move is now slightly like let's call it like difficult because it's very dangerous with e6, b6, and so on. So, but here is actually a very interesting move e4.
Okay, and we're giving away a pawn. But
well,
it's not
I have
really
a pawn
like
up, right? And the idea
Okay.
is if you take like this, then you actually just get like a very bad position. Because here I think it's simply knight e5 and you are just much better.
Yeah, that looks
That's
nice.
not a problem. And after knight takes e4, and I had it now in a game actually, bishop b5 check. The only move which doesn't lose for black is bishop d7.
Okay.
And then you get this kind of positions like with queen d5, bishop b5, and queen takes e4. This I analyzed, of course, precisely on my course. But my opponent in the blitz game, she played like knight c6. But after knight e5, the position is lost because the problem is that bishop d7 fails to knight takes f7. And since it happened to me in the blitz game, I can guarantee you that this is like a very quick way in order to get a winning position, right?
Well, okay, was your opponent like 1500
No,
or
she was
something?
2,350. It was a sport chief from Uzbekistan.
Fair enough. Okay, no questions.
Anyway, it was a blitz game, and now here she realized that bishop d7 doesn't work. She took on c5, but okay, I'm winning an exchange, and I have a much better position.
All right.
So it's just to show like one of the tricks. The other main idea of c3, apart from c5 and now fighting for an extra pawn, the good part is if black is not deep into detail here, you're just a pawn up for the entire game. That's a good part. And not everybody likes that. That's why a lot of players here don't play c5.
Okay, cool.
So instead of c5, that is actually what this line is about. Some people are clever and try to play c6. It's fair, no?
So it's a neo.
No, the thing,
counter neo.
I tell you the reasoning. If I now play bishop f4, they get back to bishop f5 line. But if they play bishop f5 immediately, they have to cope with queen b3. We will discuss it like later on. Just that's one of the advantages of the early
Now
c3, that the bishop f5 line is stopped. That's why people are clever and play c6.
So it isn't stopped.
And now I'm also clever, I play queen c2.
So you're preventing bishop to
yes.
f5. Okay.
Here I think the best line is g6. And then you play after bishop f4.
And I actually remember you played against
Dinara
the
Wagner.
engine.
Yeah, also against the engine, but also against
Dinara
Dinara
Wagner.
Wagner.
Yeah.
We had such games here, yes, queen b3. But this is fine for white and for black. But of course, here are some subtleties where white can get some slight edge if black is not careful. And it's also, of course, discussed. But here comes also like a very funny line, and I won at least one of my simultaneous exhibition games in this, because some people would say like, bishop g4, knight e5, bishop h5, and I get my bishop eventually to g6. I have a typical Slav position and so on. And here the funny part is like that after queen f5, you may already get a little bit under the wheels. And the idea of this is like that your queen is aiming, for example, like e6, like a common natural move, queen h3, and now you understand that after bishop g6, if I capture, your rook is pinned.
Gotcha.
So the only move here which doesn't give you headaches is rook g8, but that's not the move which you want to play, obviously.
Definitely not, especially if you want to castle at one point.
Yeah, so basically after rook g8, e4 is very strong. You cannot take with a knight. And if you take with a pawn, then g4, bishop g6 and knight e2.
Wild.
And after knight e7, you simply capture, play g5, take on e4, and you have a much better position. So instead of e6, of course, there are other moves. But e6 just gets you into troubles, because if not rook g8, something like bishop e7, and after g4, you don't want this, right?
No.
It's horrible. I mean, it's just lost. So that's why instead of e6, and people tend to do this, the best move is bishop g6, but also knight e7 was played in one of my games, and it was very funny. Here, my opponent actually took on e5 in the simultaneous games. I took, and then he realized that after bishop g4 and queen h4, he's losing a piece, and there was nothing he could do.
That's difficult.
So here the only move, and this is already not easy to do, is queen c8, to get into the opposition with the queen.
Okay.
Now queen h4 to get out of it. And here are two moves which I analyzed, knight takes e5, but this ending is just better, because you cannot take on e5.
You're losing a bishop.
Because of f4 and g4, so you have to play like knight h6, but then after c4, and it's also like very deeply analyzed, white gets a much better position. The idea is basically like if you take on c4, then you can play with e4, and this bishop will be out of the game forever. That's the bad idea, and even if you play with b5, you will get under the wheels very quickly. So
a lot of tricks.
Yeah, so that's why after queen h4, instead of knight takes e5, it's nothing for black. I mean, it's horrible. h6, g4, and here g5. For example, like queen g3, but also this is just better for white, obviously. So that means that after the move queen f5, the only good move is bishop g6. Queen h3, and now to take on b1. And you don't have all these troubles, but also this position is just better for white because of the bishop pair.
Bishop pair, exactly. And you're going to castle the other way anyway, so...
So this is just a kind of slight exhibition that how quickly you can lose with bishop g4. For this reason here, g6 is really the most healthy move. Okay, let's go to the next chapter. How to do that. Since I created this course, actually I won a lot of games, especially in simultaneous exhibitions. Okay, the move order now doesn't matter. We would start with d4, d5, but
you can get there on various ways.
So bishop f5, that's what people like love to do in the normal London, but
And
here
now you
after
play
queen b3,
queen b3.
the best move is queen c8. But instead of queen c8, like I had a lot of times like b6 in a simultaneous game, bishop f4, e6. And here, now it's not a novelty anymore, but when I created this course, I found this very interesting move.
Check.
Queen a4 check. And the idea is the following. You have to play queen d7, because if you go knight e7, then after like queen c6, now the c7 guy is under attack. For example, like rook c8, because if you play a6 or something, I can take with the queen on c7 and I'm just a pawn up. So rook c8, e3, bishop a6 now is a threat, knight h5, and here the move g4 is finishing the story. You win a very important tempo, because if you take on g4, knight e5 comes with a tempo, and that's very important. So the best move here is to take on b1. I take on h5, bishop e4, and bishop e2, and still knight e5 is like a kind of threat after rook g1. And this is just lost. So the thing is, after queen a4 check, you have to go queen d7, because knight fd7 is also bad. I mean, it's not that bad, but it's bad. Because, okay, for example, like bishop e7, and then you play c4.
But I mean bishop d7, that is like from the other, that's so difficult.
Queen d7 is the best move, but here the funny part is you have to take with the king because of the c7 pawn. That's why queen a4 check is so very, very strong. And I was surprised that when I like met this course that it was never played. Now it is played. Someone probably like saw it. But back this time it was not played. Maybe now it's like 1-2 times in the database. I'm not sure.
It's fun because C3 is already there, so there's nothing which can harm you if you take the pawn.
So king takes c7, knight e5 check, king e8, and for example, like you can play e3, knight e2, or g4. I mean, g4 is one option. The idea is you exchange the g4 pawn with the c7 pawn. And by the rules, like the more central the pawns are, the more important they are.
Gotcha.
That's why it would be one way to either get the bishop pair or to get the exchange of pawns. But you can also play e3. So that's why queen c8 is the best move. And it was played like many times in the database. And here my suggestion is c4. Because now the queen is a little bit like misplaced, and usually the rule says like if there's a bad harmony of pieces, you should open up. So that's why this makes sense. And here, in my opinion, and this is also what I analyzed for black, there is a novelty also for black. I'm not sure it's a novelty anymore, but this is the best line for black. And the idea is the following. Here, okay, of course you can play bishop f4, but the problem is here bishop f4 is not so good because you run into the tempo with knight e5. And you don't want this. That's why I analyzed here g3, and here the strongest idea is knight c6. Back when I analyzed it, it's a novelty. And the idea is to play knight c6, queen e7, and long castle, and you immediately make some pressure. And obviously, as a London player, you know that you don't want this kind of scene where you have to go with knight a3. That's why you have to lose this tempo. a3 is here the best move. I mean, you can play bishop g2, but you don't want this because that's what actually a London player is hoping for, but not against himself, obviously. So that's why a3. And here queen d7, bishop g2, and long castle. That's what the engines are just for black, and it's very good. And here, if you want to have some fun, and I don't think you have time to do something about the d4 pawn because then black is just getting the initiative, so you have to sacrifice it. But the good part about the sacrifice is you either get huge compensation or it's a draw. So, for example, the forced draw goes with knight takes f3, bishop f3, queen d4. Now I don't want to exchange the queen, so I go queen a2 because queen b3, queen b6 would give a tempo. And now after knight e4, queen b3, it's a draw. Because queen b6 now doesn't work because the e4 is hanging. But if you don't play knight e4, I have bishop e3, and then of course my compensation is huge. So that's why this is like
you're almost forced to play knight e4.
Knight c5, queen a2, knight e4, queen b3. This is the best I mean, this is the worst case for white. Otherwise, white is just very fine. If you don't take on f3, for example, like queen c6, I also analyzed, but then after queen a2, you take, queen a6, and bishop e3, you have exactly what I was already saying. You have a huge compensation, rook c1 is coming, and it's much easier for white.
Looks very nice.
Even though a pawn down, but it's not like a pawn you're like crying about, right?
Absolutely. No. It's not there for a
So
reason.
for black, I would strongly recommend this line. For white, I would strongly recommend, obviously, to sacrifice his pawn. But you have to know what you're doing, because you have to go for the draw. Otherwise, with black, you may get under the wheels.
Oops.
And apart from d takes c4, the most common reply is to play with e6. Now my suggestion is that you take, for example, like knight takes d5 is always bad from the positional point of view because of the central pawn on d4. You play knight d2 and you get a better position. For example, like bishop g4, not to lose this guy, and you take the initiative. That's why, obviously, you have to take with a pawn. And now, after knight c3, c6, bishop f4, it's like a common position, which, of course, I also analyzed a little bit more deeply. But that's the best what black can get.
Wow.
That's the best line.
Okay.
Of course, I think I also discussed here, instead of e6, the move c6, so that you could take, for example, I mean, now if you take, the c-pawn can take back. And the rule says that as long as the knight is on b8, you shouldn't take if c takes d5 can come. That's why here you don't take. Because here he will obviously reply with c takes d5. That's why here my suggestion in the course is knight h4.
Knight h4 again, okay.
Yes, it's like the common kind of Slav idea. You try to hunt down the bishop. And here, obviously, like I discuss all the important moves, right? So this is also on the course. Now we can go to the next chapter. This was the most important subtleties about this line. And here, of course, like this is what we usually get, even with other move orders. So this is just what I changed in my old course. And my old course was in German. Now I'm working on the old course in English. So it will also be featured.
Lucky you.
So here, that's why here in my newest course in the Neo-London, I give e3 without bishop g3, because if you play with bishop g3 here, then I think most of you know about the plan with c5, queen c7, and then you would say like, okay, I skip knight c6, and this is very, let's say, fine for black, right? That's why here in my new course I give e3. Obviously, like I discuss everything about the capture. Immediately to capture and to play c5 is not that great. I had it in the game, because now the knight is not on d2, which means I can seriously fight to keep this pawn. These are kind of small subtleties, which are very important. That's why if black takes on f4, d takes c4, he should start with castle, wait for knight d2 or bishop d3, and then play with c5. These kind of subtleties. Or you play after e3, as I give in the course, immediately c5, knight d2. Obviously, I also discussed that move, but this is in a different file, because here, after bishop takes c6, you can take on e3 or c3, and this is also a very double-edged position. Black is fine, but has to be precise. So I just show you like one of the benefits of keeping the bishop on f4, because now after queen c7, we never played bishop g3, so we win an important tempo, because now we can actually take.
Okay.
And here we are tempo up.
Okay.
So, and here actually this is very nice, and this is what I analyzed, and it was of course in the database also like a Ding-Liren game, if I'm not mistaken. And this position is extremely like dangerous for black.
Oh.
And here knight c6, it was played in the game, g4 and rook c8.
The pawns are rolling. Yeah, I was like, okay, the king just stays in the middle. I see.
Yes, I mean rook c8 is one move which I give, but the much more interesting line is with knight d7. And here in some game of Ding-Liren against someone else, like g5 was played, but this is a blunder, because now after the capture and the sacrifice, black is actually like much better.
That's rough.
So that's why queen f3 is my novelty. I think now it's not a novelty anymore, but back this time it was a novelty. And the computer likes it. And here the difference is like that now this sacrifice is not working, because the coordination is much better. I have queen e2. No, I have like king d1 or something. So here doesn't work. So, but the most interesting line indeed is after queen f3 to take on d4. If you play f6, I just take and play queen h3 and go long castle. And my threat is f5, and I have a very dangerous position.
That looks great.
That's why best what black can do is to take, and to play queen e7. And this is what I analyzed, because this is like getting now very, very concrete. You take, and play g5. You sacrifice this pawn on f4. That's not difficult to guess because you see immediately
you see it.
that I have queen h3. Otherwise, it would not make sense. But it's not over the story. It's getting much more funny. Queen f7 is just bad because it runs into g6 ideas, right? So you take queen h3 and now rook f5. And here, this could be all found on the board. Because even like you see after rook f5, if I take on f5, for example, like, and e takes f5, you can feel that black has compensation. Because of moves like knight e5, the white squares, you know, it's not that simple. Rook f1 is not possible. So this is very unclear, this position. But that's why after rook f5, the ancient just thinks in a much more logical way, saying like, okay, why is rook f5 so strong? Because it's supported by this guy. And the rule of like chess logics always like apply in a way, okay, what does my opponent want? He basically just wants to prevent any capture.
Sure.
So it's not like that he threats something or he has something to do. So that's why my next question is which piece I can improve. So what would be your answer?
Our rook.
Yes, so what is the most logical move if you
E1?
understand? Yes, rook e1, because you basically attack the strongest defender.
You don't take the other rook because it has to take care of the
So now
d5.
knight
Okay.
e5 is the only move, because if I play rook e8, then I can take, right?
Easy.
So knight e5 is the only move. And now comes the move you... I'm not sure it's here. No, this is a move here you will be laughing about it because you will never understand it. The reasoning is the following, that if I want to take on f5, one of the biggest problem, okay, here doesn't make any sense, but one of the biggest problem is actually that my queen is out of play.
Okay.
Right? So to make the threat of taking on f5 more alive, you need also like a better coordination of pieces. And this gets you to the move which is impossible to find. It's a move which you would never do because it's like so unlogical that you will never find it. And Arnie, you saw this before.
Well,
Can you remember the move?
Unfortunately, that doesn't mean much in my little, I don't know, fish brain.
I mean, in order to activate the queen, you just have sometimes to give some pawns, right? And this move looks so unlogical because you can capture it actually like 100 times.
Yeah.
But the fun part is,
Whatever
like,
you capture,
if
it
you
doesn't
capture
work.
with a knight, then rook takes e6. That's the easy part.
Yeah,
and you fall apart.
That's quite easy.
If you capture with a pawn, then there's rook e4, queen e5, and rook takes e5. It's also not so difficult to find. Yeah? So pawn takes doesn't work. So the only move which works actually is bishop takes c4. And now, in order to really activate all your pieces, you need to do another move which is impossible for a human being, but that's why actually I analyze it with super engines this course. And the move is king b1. It's very simple. You want to take on c4, then to take on f5, and suddenly the exchange sacrifice is turning out bad because the position is open. And usually, like, rooks are stronger than minor pieces when they're open files. Plus, my queen can be activated. For example, like bishop a6 now, and now I take, and the huge difference is the move queen c3, which we actually achieved by sacrificing this pawn. But in comparison to the position with the pawn on c3, now the whole coordination of black is falling apart.
I see, and that's the reason the king is out of the way too, is like it's dodging almost everything.
Yes, and now
which
for
it can
example,
be.
like knight g6, knight f3, and white is winning.
Wow.
This is like one of the lines which actually can happen on the board, especially like it was already played here with the bad move g5, but I improved it with queen f3 and I checked all the lines.
Okay.
And this is one of the reasons why actually I prefer not to play bishop g3. So now we go to the next chapter.
Okay.
And here what I want to show is like what happens like when the move order changes. So for example, like the idea is not to play bishop g3, but at some point I will do this, and I will do it in a moment when my opponent played knight c6. Then I go back to the main line.
That's the alarm button.
That's the alarm button. Because here, of course, I mean, b6 is one of the lines. I think some people remember like queen e5, knight e7, knight e5, knight e7, you take. And here you have to take with the queen on d7 because of this opening trick.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
Take, and bishop takes h7. And then you have knight e4 at the end. I mean, this is like very common, latest after the game of Kamsky against Shankland. And the idea is now, since g6 will not work as a d7 guy is hanging, if you had taken with the queen on d7, you would have the same position with the bishop on c8. And what I'm doing here in this course, of course, I'm showing this trick, but I also like show how to proceed after like queen takes d7 and how to play this kind of positions.
Sure.
So this is also like deeply analyzed. But what I want to show is not queen e7, but the most common line is with b6. And here there are 3 moves, knight e5, queen e2, but I only study e4. D takes e4 is very bad, and most of the players know it because of knight takes e4, and of course this is also on my DVD. But what I actually changed here is that knight h5, in the old theory everybody played a3, but here is this very interesting knight g5, and this is very deeply analyzed also in this course with a lot of novelties. And that's one of the most important lines in this course, because b6 is very fashionable also for black. But I can tell you, if white here learned all this stuff, it's very difficult for black.
So you have to learn a couple of things, because there are very surprising moves, of course, but it will give you an advantage.
Yeah, so for example, like here I think I analyzed it all. Like these are the bad moves. The best move here is g6 by theory. I think h6 is bad, bishop h6 is bad, bishop takes e2 is bad, but it's all on my DVD, so it's all deeply analyzed. So I just show like quickly this g6 move, queen e2, and now the strongest reply is c takes d4. All the other moves are bad. Or let's say not so common, bad I wouldn't say, but c takes d4 is the main line, h4. And here, of course, I analyzed all the moves which black can do, like to take, to play bishop h6, to play bishop takes d2, and bishop e7. I think from those options, I'm not sure what is the best for black, I forgot, but it doesn't matter. We can just go like shortly into the stuff. For example, like here I analyzed 2 things. Like knight g4,
that
take,
is absolutely bonkers.
Take, and now the move you will never guess, but the strongest move is rook h3.
Oh, come on.
The idea is to bring the other rook, you know.
The queen doesn't work? Why not? Because of h6? Perhaps.
Maybe also because of some, queen takes g5. So that's why rook h3 is very logical.
That makes a lot of
sense. But this is already winning for white. So that's why I think here probably you have to take on d2, queen d2, and here this is like where there are games actually in the database, a lot of blitz games, I think of Kashlinskaya with black. And here there's a move a5 and queen e7. And a5 is a novelty from black, and I analyze it because it was like a computer's choice. And here it's going very deep into analyze, but the common move is queen e7, which was played, a3. And here, for example, like I analyzed a5 and queen d4, but this is also like the knight d4. The problem is like that if black is not deep into it, black will lose any of these games.
And that can happen often, more often than enough.
So after c takes d4, h4, apart from bishop takes d2, there's also bishop h6. But this I give in a different chapter. I will not get now too much into details. Like bishop e7, I analyzed here, h5, d takes c3, g5 is another move which I analyzed. Let's say d takes c3, I take d4. Here I give 2 options. One is c4, and then bishop e4. The other option I give is to take on g6. You have to capture back, but f-pawn doesn't work, you lose. So h takes g6 and now long castle. Do this if you are like happy about it. But it's my novelty. It's my novelty long castle. But it's like also the strongest move in this position. For example, the only move now which doesn't lose is king g7. Because d takes c3 loses to knight c4. Because bishop g6 too much.
Takes it.
So king g7 only moved. Now bishop f4 with the idea of bishop h6. That's why rook h8, knight e4. Bishop e7, and this position actually is very unclear if I remember it correctly. So for example, I analyzed it further with to take, d takes c3, bishop e4, king g8, best move to activate the queen, and queen e3 with double-edged position, compensation, whatever.
Gotcha.
So, but this is just like a small kind of exhibition of how deep these things are, and for me it was interesting because first of all, the cloud engines now make the work much easier. Yeah. But you just see, like, when you look at these examples, how deep the whole thing is. And of course, apart from these variations, also like a lot of other things are on this DVD.
Nice. Yes, you have really made something great happening. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the Neo London. Of course, the link is below in the description and in the Chess-Based News article about this. So give it a shot, give it a try. And thank you very much for introducing this very fun opening to all of us.